have a good panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, David Miller, President, Wildlife Fund, Canada.
Hi.
Please tell me if I don't hear one.
I'd like to welcome the panelists. First of all, thank you, all of you, for being here in this panel, which is going to build on what Microsoft was talking about the necessity of inclusion in the smart cities movement. So I'm David Miller. Our panelists for today, first of all, Mariela Alfonzo, who is the founder of State of Place. She is a PhD in planning. State of Place is a software that helps tell the benefits of investment in public infrastructure. Mariela. Okay, I think that was a lukewarm welcome for Mariela, so let's do it again. Please welcome Mariela Alfonzo. The next panelist is Adrian Benepe, who should not need an introduction. He's the Senior Vice President and responsible for city parks at the Trust for Public Land, and of course, better known in New York City as the former Parks Commissioner. Let's give a warm welcome to Adrian Benepe. The next panelist is James Ramsey from RAD, R-A-A-D Architects, but that's not the hat he's wearing here. He's wearing a hat as a citizen activist and the creator of Lowline. So James Ramsey, a warm New York City welcome. And the final panelist to join us is Lela Goren, who is the president and owner of the Lela Goren Group, which is a developer here in the state of New York. She has an amazingly diverse background and some fascinatingly inclusive projects she's going to talk about today. So an enormous welcome, please, for Lela Goren. All right, the first thing, so we've got a couple of questions we're going to discuss as a panel, and we will try to leave a little bit of time for questions from you. But if we run out of time, I apologize in advance. First, I'm going to ask the panelists, though, in 1 minute each, can you just give a better introduction for yourselves than the horribly inadequate ones that I just did, and touch on your work and the nature of your work and what you're doing? Mariela.
All right. Thanks, David. It was a great introduction. So I am the founder and CEO of State of Place, and we quantify what it is that people love about places based on over 290 urban design features and forecast the benefits of making them better. So essentially, we're helping cities and developers make the case for better places by literally quantifying the return on investment of making them more walkable and livable so that they can quell naysayers, get project approvals, and secure funding faster and more affordably.
Perfect and precisely within 1 minute. Excellent. Adrian.
Adrian Benepe. I served for almost 3 decades in New York City Parks, including 11 years as Parks Commissioner. Here, I now work for the Trust for Public Land, a national nonprofit that conserves large-scale rural land and develops parks and cities. We have a very simple goal on the city side that I oversee. Every resident of every city in America should have a park within a 10-minute walk.
Wow, I love that. I'm James Ramsey. I guess I come to this talk from a slightly different angle. My background is in architecture and science, which then led me to put together some ideas to come up with a concept to create an underground park fueled by an advanced solar technology right here in New York. And this is a project that no one asked us to do. So we've undertaken this over the course of the last 10 years as a sort of a grassroots movement to introduce a green public space into a neighborhood that previously had been nearly completely neglected and is very lacking in public space.
Hi, my name is Lela Goren, and I, till recently, was Chief Development Officer and Vice Chair at WeWork. And I also have a development company. I'm one of the few real estate developers that's women-owned and women-led development. And when we start, I'll talk a little bit about my projects. They focus now on social impact and social change.
So the purpose of this panel is to introduce that dialogue to this week's Smart Cities Conference. And my perspective comes from municipal politics. I spent 20 years in municipal politics in Canada, and a little bit from my personal role now as head of the World Wildlife Fund Canada. We work with communities to help them meet their needs in a way that also protects nature. So our work is very much about empowering communities on the belief that if communities are empowered and their economic needs are met, they'll be the long-term protectors of nature, not simply rules and regulations of government, which can be changed if you have a different government post an election. So that's a little bit about my background and why I'm here. So the first question I'd like to ask the panelists, and as you can see, we've got quite a diverse background from citizens activists to technology, to an experience with public space, to the development industry. The first question I'd like to ask the panelists is about smart cities and the smart city movement, because the very language of smart cities can be seen by some as exclusionary. So, for example, disruptive technologies can be transformative, but for some, it can undermine jobs and income. The debate between Uber and taxi drivers being an example. A disruptive technology. I hope that's not me. A disruptive technology that is affecting jobs and incomes for those who are not part of the technology. So the question to the panel in that context, how do we create an approach to building smart cities that is inclusionary in both process and result? And I'd like to ask Lela to talk about this first from the perspective of a developer.
So I think it's a good time to show a very short video, one of the projects that I'm developing. I think they told me to roll the tape is the language they wanted.
To take this building, the walls of which, if they could talk, would tell us of many injustices, and make it a building that symbolizes and houses freedom. We've tried to have a women's building here in New York before. In the 1970s, Ms. Magazine and others found a building, but it was just too complicated. There were too many different elements to be put together in a short time. So it is long overdue. It has been wanted and desired and cherished and looked forward to for decades.
Violence and discrimination against women and girls is a huge problem in this city, in this country, and across the world. And the idea of having some of the brightest thinkers from all over this city coming together and figuring out how are we going to change the world so that it looks different for our children and for their children. And the possibilities when we collaborate are endless.
In the last 30 years, we have seen a dramatic arc of progress, but we need to ride on that progress because there's still so many women and girls who are left behind.
We work on women's rights all over the world. There are women's rights groups in Mauritania, in Kenya, in United Arab Emirates. Wherever they are usually marginalized because they are working to transform society from within, bringing everybody together in one building where they can be, they can live, they can breathe, they can transform. It's huge.
Having the ability to share a space with other women's organizations and having the support of the city and the state to do that could be really game-changing. It means that we could focus on the work, the mission of our organizations as opposed to expending all this energy struggling to survive and keep the doors open and the lights on.
While we're a national and international men's organization doing work to end violence against women, being part of the women's building is really exciting because it really allows us to be around the energy and the creativity of women doing like-minded work.
I can't think of anything more powerful than the transformation from a place that was there to sort of correct what's gone wrong in women's lives, and instead this building will represent everything that's right about women's lives and empowerment for them.
My name is Gloria Steinem, and I am so proud to be part of the group that is at last bringing a women's building to the city of New York.
So this building that you saw, the corner building, is a former women's prison. It was closed down by Hurricane Sandy. It flooded it, and the state didn't know what to do with it. They went through a very long, extensive process, and we bid on an RFP and won it, and are transforming a place that represented so much pain in women's lives to a place now that will nurture and cultivate organizations that work on these mission-aligned issues. In that process, what we have done, which is the opposite of any development project I've ever worked on, it's bringing in the community to reflect on what programs they want to see in this building. And some of the women that we've included are formerly incarcerated women who actually were residents in this former prison. And the process has just been transformative for me on a personal basis, but I also think for thousands of women that so far have been part of this process.
So a very powerful example of inclusion, and I love that last fact that women who were incarcerated are now part of the process of rebuilding this building for other women. I don't think you could be more inclusionary from a philosophical perspective. Anybody else want to jump in here about, how do we change the narrative around smart cities? How do we create an approach that's inclusionary in both process and result?
Well, for us, part of our mission is really creating more walkable, livable places, and the benefits of walkability are felt by people of all, shapes, colors, backgrounds, incomes. And so our mission is sort of core to that. It's really about making places better for everybody. But in terms of our actual process, the data that we collect, actually anybody can be trained to collect that data, and in many of our engagements with our customers, that has been part of our process, because part of what they're trying to do besides gaining support for their project is engaging the community. And we also actually have supplementary data that we collect that actually looks at communities' preferences and their current satisfaction levels with the objective characteristics of places. So while the State of Place algorithm is looking at objectively what's there and what's not, it can be supplemented with this more community-driven data. And then in general, we're really trying to sort of democratize planning. We're in many ways replacing the expensive consultants and offering that's more sort of top-down, expert-driven, and offering a more data-driven, bottom-up, evidence-based approach that's a lot more affordable than engaging a consultant.
So, Adrian, you started to jump in. I just have to say, Adrian is live tweeting from the panel. I encourage people here to live tweet, but I hope you've got your sound off in case your phone rings. And I am David Miller, should you wish to mention something that I have done or should have done in your tweeting.
Hey, actually, I'm next to Adrian. I can tell you he was thumbing through his Instagram.
Okay, Adrian, from your perspective, public spaces have been your career in life. So how do we change this narrative about smart cities to be more inclusive?
So let me just say, if you want to tweet, I'm at Adrian_Benepe, and this is at State of Place right here. And then, you're not on Twitter, but Lowline NYC is. Anyway, so I work in a very real, sort of tactile, tangible world, which is making parks in cities. But you can't make parks until you figure out the best places to make them, who the partners should be, what the elements of a great space are. And that's where data comes in. And data is so key. My old boss, Mike Bloomberg, knew a little bit about data. And there were two sayings. One is, if you can't count it, it doesn't count. And then the other saying, and I don't think he coined either of these, but he was very fond of saying, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. And I think it was the first administration to really create a data-driven city government, very much so. And then in my new career at the Trust for Public Land, data is everything, and particularly mapping data. Long ago, a very smart woman who I had the pleasure of working with named Amy Freitag came to me 20 years ago and said, in the future, everything we do will be on a GIS backbone. And I said, on a hamana. I can say now, 20 years later, she is absolutely right. She has seen the future, and it is GIS. Everything that we do at the Trust for Public Land is on a GIS backbone. You can map everything. And mapping and data is destiny. So let me give you an example. Our most public product, the thing you, and most people don't really know the Trust for Public Land and what we do, but our most public product is every year, and this year it'll be on May 24th, we announce, it's kind of like the top colleges. We do the top park systems, and we rank the 100 largest American cities as to how well they provide parks. And it's all data-based. This is not, oh, I like this park, it's pretty, it's nice, and so on. That's a whole other set of data. But it's how much of the city is dedicated to parkland, how much is the city and others spending on the parks, what's the median park size, but the most important single factor that you score the most point on is how many people in this city live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And it's got to be a real walk. It can't be, oh, I'll grow wings and fly over this freeway, or I will swim across the Gowanus Canal. It's got to be, you can really walk there. So stay tuned. You can go online and see last year's park score, but it's all data-based, and that's where you start to get this inclusionary thing, David. It's if you can put the information out there and make it accessible. Anyone can go online. Now, of course, you have to have the computer and the Wi-Fi to go online, so that's a key point. But anyone who can get to a computer, say even if you get to the library or someplace, you can go online and find out, does your neighborhood have access to parks? And if not, why not? And that information, those data are power, and you can start to say, how come I don't have a park in my neighborhood?
So I think that's a good throw to James. James, you've helped, as a citizen activist, create this incredible public space. Do you have some comments about how you engage people from diverse backgrounds, including people from backgrounds that aren't very powerful, including people from backgrounds that might not have access to technology and can't participate that way?
Yeah, I mean, really, one of the things we're really very quickly getting to here is that we're talking about the intersection of public space and parks equity and technology, right? And the Lowline is a project that's driven by technology. But let's put that to the side for the moment and talk about the actual mechanics of how we're doing this. We're fortunate enough actually to have Robin Shapiro right here, who's leading up a lot of our sort of public outreach within our community. And I think the road that we've gone down is completely untrodden. So we've been having to feel out how to actually do something like the Lowline from the bottom up. No one asked us to do this, and to do so in a way that actually legitimately and authentically mines the local community for direct input as to what this thing is actually going to be. And so, to our great delight, there are mountains of data and data analytics and tools that we can use for our own outreach. But that's only part of the equation. So we can almost think of it as there's almost a sort of a first incarnation where all of a sudden we have these amazing, powerful tools at our disposal. But the second side of it is that a lot of the people that we're trying to reach out to don't really have the fluency, language-wise, device-wise, technologically, computer-wise, et cetera, to actually use any of these tools to impact things and actually have their voice be heard. And so I think maybe a very next step to create this sort of democratizing platform of the smart city will be to actually hone our understanding of how to reach more users and to have more people able to actually use these powerful tools so that we can actually garner legitimate and significant input that helps us to shape things that, the forces that drive park equity, et cetera.
So I got two questions arising out of that. It just occurred to me, some people here may not know the Lowline, so you might want to just give a bit more explanation about that. The second thing is, how are you doing the democratization of citizen engagement? Like, what are you actually doing?
Okay, so the first one's sort of the easier one for me to answer here. Underneath the Lower East Side in Manhattan, there's an abandoned trolley terminal. It's enormous, right? And it's about 100 and some odd years old, 120 years old almost. And the idea behind the Lowline is that we can use this advanced solar technology to mine natural sunlight, funnel that down through the street under Delancey Street, and spread it out in the space to grow stuff and create a public space in really the center of a neighborhood that has some of the least amount of green space in New York, which of course has some of the least green space of most American cities. And so this is sort of a surgical implementation of urbanism and technology to create hopefully a revolutionary public space in a neighborhood that almost needs it the most. And so that's what the Lowline is. And I think one important thing to note is that the Lower East Side, for those of you unfamiliar with it, is one of the oldest immigrant neighborhoods in America. Like, you get off the boat in Ellis Island, you go straight to the Lower East Side, right? And so it's also this melting pot of all these different cultures, all these different languages, et cetera, and all these different voices, which on the one hand probably makes this the most challenging project to undertake ever. But on the other hand, also gives us a unique opportunity to try and reach out to all these disparate groups to make our case and to try and solicit input for this project. And so the ways that we've had to do that, some are technology-based, certainly. We have online platforms, et cetera. But really, a lot of it has to do with really kind of hitting the pavement and getting out there. And hopefully, on the one hand, acquainting people with these methods that are technologically available to them, but also just sort of, stopping people and making sure that we are able to reach the broadest audience possible.
So there's a place for traditional technology, if I can call shoe leather traditional technology, in addition to technology.
I think that's accurate to say. In advance of sort of taking some next steps in the accessibility of software.
So I'm mindful in this discussion that we just had the International Vice President of Microsoft very passionately say that her company and others have a duty of inclusion, and she called it inclusion by design. And I think one of the places I've seen in my experience in municipal politics in cities around the world, and it's true in New York City very much as well, we see environmental impacts, like the impact of climate change, Hurricane Sandy, which I think it's fair to say now was likely caused by climate change, but other things like the siting of transfer stations, incinerators, those kinds of environmental impacts fall disproportionately on low-income communities, partly because they don't have a political voice sometimes. So a couple of questions there for me. How do we think of public space and environmental activities in a way that addresses this problem? And I think you started talking about that, James. And another question, how do we empower communities to express their own preferences and desires? Is there a role in technology there so that communities that are differentially impacted by environmental initiatives have a chance to have a say? And I don't know if you have some comments with your platform. Is there a way to use your platform to help people look at that side of the issue, the bads for the community, not just the goods?
Yeah, absolutely. Our platform right now, we focus on sort of predicting more on the real estate premium side of making places better, and this is just the beginning of what we're going. We're looking to expand the forecasting models to look at environmental benefits, things like greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle miles traveled, air quality, on the health side, healthcare costs, health outcomes, and then even well-being indicators, so that this becomes a very robust way to communicate the triple bottom line value of making places better. So with that, communities can certainly engage and collect this data on their own, run it through our models and show, well, you know what, if you have an idea to put an incinerator here or something that would have a negative impact, we can not only capture what that would do to things like air quality, but then also on the flip side show these are other redevelopment opportunities that would bring more economic benefits or more well-being benefits to the community, and what's a tangible way to sort of capitalize upon that. So we're trying to really equip people with a much more powerful way to advocate for themselves by translating and quantifying what that value is, and not just expressing what it is that they want from their community, which is important. But just as with cities and developers, when they're trying to show their vision, it's just a lot easier to leverage change, unfortunately or fortunately, or whatever you want to call it, when you can bring in the economic benefits of that. So
if I were working with low-income community faced with a new transfer station, say in the Bronx, give a real example, State of Place could today help them look at the health impacts and all of the other potential impacts of that, model the negatives, and then model the positive of what you might do with that land in a different way?
Right, right now, we can model the benefits from an economic perspective, and we've just put in, State of Place was funded by a small business innovation research grant from the National Science Foundation. We've just put in for phase 2 of that, which would help us expand the model to look at these environmental aspects, as well as the well-being and the health outcomes.
So it's going to be
so very soon.
It'll be a really powerful tool when that comes.
Absolutely.
So, Adrian?
Yeah, so, on the one hand, if you look at the impacts of climate change on cities, yes, in places like New Orleans, the impacts were disproportionately felt by poor people who were in the low-lying areas, were flooded out first. If you look at Sandy, it's a little bit more nuanced. For example, the Rockaways were badly flooded. At one end of the Rockaways, Neponset and Bell Harbor, very wealthy people. At the other end, in Far Rockaway, public housing, very poor people, both equally impacted. The biggest impacts of Sandy were Lower Manhattan, mostly wealthy people and business communities. In some ways, climate and sea level rise and geography are all destiny, and we're all bound by that common destiny. So it's really important for people to understand some basics. Are you in a flood zone? Know that, map it. I think when Hurricane Sandy hit, how many people were here in the area when that happened? A lot of you. So it was pretty devastating. 50 people died, $19 billion in economic and property value damage and so on. And then you had elected officials, leaders get up and say, one person famously said, I won't name names, "We are stronger than the storm." Excuse me, that bullshit. We are not stronger than the storm. Anyone who says
Adrian, this is a family panel, okay?
John Stewart.
I want to live tweet
John
this.
Stewart said that on TV the other night. So, we are not stronger than the storm. It's foolish to think so. Literally, our heads are in the sand. And it, I think, was really foolish to say, let's just rebuild Rockaway just the way it was. And we'll have slightly higher freeboards. That's crazy. Because Rockaway is a sandbar. We should have moved everybody off Rockaway, densified in the high grounds of Brooklyn and Queens, and get people out of harm's way. There are hundreds of thousands of people living in flood zones, and we're saying, we'll be stronger than the storm. We are not stronger than the storm. Let's stop pretending that. Let's take climate change seriously. And the only way you can do that is by demonstrating to people, hey, this will happen again. It's going to happen in this city. It's going to happen. All of us who live in big cities around the world, most of us live near water because that's the way cities develop, because of trade via water. It's very simple. Ocean cities, river cities, we're all vulnerable to flooding. We're all vulnerable to urban heat impact. One of the things we're doing at Trust for Public Land is we've developed a really cool tool. And I want to give a shout out to our technology partner, Esri. Esri gives us millions of dollars of free technology and help so that we can map climate change mitigation protocols for cities. And one of the things we're looking at is, how can you deal with urban flooding, with storm surge, with sea level rise? But the biggest danger right now with climate change is urban heat islands. So you need to be able to map the urban hotspots and then figure out how to mitigate those things. And we realized that how are we going to figure out the hotspots in cities? Cities couldn't tell us. And we realized there are satellites circling constantly, bouncing signals off the ground who know exactly where the hotspots are. And you can just totally freely access that technology. So it gets back to access to technology, who controls it. And there's a lot of stuff out there, data that are out there that you can grab right now and put to use to help mitigate the climate change and also mitigate the adverse impact, particularly on poor communities.
So data, one solution, perhaps repurposing buildings as well. Lela, can you maybe talk about another project you've got going? I think, for me at least, fits within this question of how do you deal with environmental bads in a community and turn it into something good, particularly when it has a negative impact on low-income communities.
So I purchased an abandoned power plant on the Hudson River. It is in Yonkers, New York. Anyone know where Yonkers is here? All right, it's a local crowd. So if you've ever taken the train up to Albany, it's on the left-hand side. It's an enormous power plant. It was abandoned. It was called the Gates of Hell by the community. And I decided to undertake this crazy complex project. It's basically bigger than this room. With several buildings, they're attached. The biggest hall is a turbine hall. It's bigger than this. It's over 1 million cubic square feet. It sits in a neighborhood that in Yonkers, that's literally on the wrong side of the track. And I decided that part of the social impact that we wanted to have, both for the local community but the larger community, is to take this space, and I'm assuming most of you know what the Tate Modern is, which was also a transformation of a power plant. And the mayor has called this project an anchor to the community and to the city of Yonkers, both cultural and economic anchor. And we entered the Brownfields program and historic tax credit program. It's a very difficult capital stack. Most conventional financing models don't fit it, but I highly recommend, if any of you here have any kind of abandoned potential anchor building, come talk to me.
So James, any comments on this topic? You know, there are well-documented history of differential environmental impacts on low-income communities and other marginalized communities. And by the way, Lela, thank you for mentioning a mayor. Their important role has not been mentioned enough in this panel. Anyway, James, any comments on that theme?
Well, sure. You know, one of the things that immediately springs to mind is that with all of these powerful analytical tools in mind, citing things like an incinerator or a transit transit facility, et cetera, is something that very much should be informed by the data itself and the GIS mapping, right? These are incredible tools that we can use to make the most efficient possible outcome. What should not be the primary consideration is how good buddies you are with, the speaker of whatever, right? A situation where sort of locating things like this, infrastructure things, amenities, parks, et cetera, is based on income and who you know rather than the data itself, I think is an issue. It's my hope that the next generation of developments in this field will lead us to a situation where these powerful tools can be more available and make things easier as a democratizing force to people who may not really have that much access to them now. And I think probably everyone in this room agrees that providing that level of access makes for a more efficient, wealthier, happier city. And wow, okay, this is the worst metaphor to use, but a rising tide lifts all boats. But yeah.
In the age of climate change, that might not be a positive, James. But,
yes, I noticed.
So we've got about 5 minutes if people want to ask a couple of questions. If you have a question, stick your hand up. Okay, right here.
Hi. Okay. I've got a very loud voice. I could probably do this without a microphone.
And it's being taped, so we need it. And if you could just say who you are as well.
Oh, my name is Jacqueline Gold. I work for the City of New York. We're bringing Wi-Fi to low-income housing projects through New York City Housing Authority, as well as the Link project, as well as a new conduit corridor in East New York, and other kinds of projects bringing the internet to low-income people and bridging the digital divide. But I wanted to ask you, since I live right down the road from Yonkers, a little more about your project. Can you tell us more about what's going to be in the building and who's financing it, and is it on the river in Yonkers? I wonder if it raises any of the questions about being in the flood zone or not. So if you could just give us more detail.
Oh, we're definitely in the flood zone. Actually, there are ways to build buildings where you allow the water in and that's what we're doing. We're going to let the water in. There's high tide and low tide, and water actually goes in. So programming revolves around that. There's a website, LelaGorenGroup.com, Lela. I see you wondering. You can come to me after, I'll give you a card. And we have a video and a lot of information online about it. The financing of these types of projects, as I said before, is very complicated. So it's individual investors, and there are some banks like Goldman Sachs as an urban group fund and others that look at these types of projects and see that there is some type of social impact. And it's not just IRR driven, but lowercase IRR, where there's some kind of social impact return. But all the projects that I take on, the goal is to make as much money as possible, but also to have as much social impact as possible at the same time. This particular power plant is a fascinating project. It sits on the water. It's actually embedded into 6,000 piles. So it's beautiful. All around it is water. Across is the Palisades. It's protected Rockefeller land. It's really stunning. And if you stand at the end of the power plant, you could see the Manhattan skyline. So the location is about 20 minutes from New York City. I have a boat. I take people up and down from Chelsea Piers. It's less than 20 minutes by boat. The program itself, it will be a space for art, culture, events, conferences, meetings, anything that you can dream of. I've brought there the head of Google Events and the head of BAM and everyone in between. So it's going to be a space where you could do whatever you want to do. We will have our own programming in there. This summer, we're expecting thousands of people to come. We're just starting with a piece of it that's safe. But it will be an extraordinary space. And the interesting thing about it is it was built in 1907 to electrify Grand Central. So it was a real coal-burning power plant, and converting it into a space that will use renewable energy in itself is an American story and the new part of history that we want to bring to it. But you guys should all come visit. You'll be really inspired. It's a very special place.
So that was terrific and inspiring. Gives rise to a question from me. We've got 3 minutes left, so I'll take one question here. If you could be succinct but still introduce yourself. And then there's one more question I want to ask.
Okay, I'll be succinct. I'm Jeremy Shaw from the city of San Francisco in the planning department there, and I think there in San Francisco and nationwide, as we can see from the last election, emotion and stories actually make the bigger difference than data, that in a lot of cases. And so I'm wondering, and I'm fully on board with I'm loving all the stories I've heard tonight, but are there examples that you guys have where you get beyond the data, or you don't even use data to connect to folks that might not engage in many of the ways you've talked about today?
I'll direct that to Adrian, and you can follow up with the others after.
I'll answer very quickly because we have 2 minutes and 23 seconds. Yes, so stories are really important, and the bottom line of what we do always starts with a face-to-face community engagement. We don't design or build anything that doesn't start with what does the community want. But you can also combine stories and data and technology, and the most recent thing is something we call story mapping, where we map things visually, but then have a story that goes with it. It could be a video story, pictures, words, whatever it might. So you put the two together, but you can't really make something desirable unless you can tell a good story. And how do you tell a good story? Get someone to tell that story. So I totally agree with you.
I also think it's a fantastic point. There's a power of storytelling that transcends, but helping that happen digitally can be even more powerful. Using Twitter, for example, which I understand was used in the American elections a fair bit, but I'm Canadian, so what do I know?
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, but if I can ask you a question at the same time, since you have the floor. Is there New York City's doing some things to bridge the digital divide. Is there a generational thing here where even in marginalized communities, younger people demographically are already overcoming some of the barriers that their parents had? Can you answer that in addition to your comment in less than 1 minute?
This one I'll
Please.
do quickly. We call what we do data-driven stories about the power of place, so you can kind of take from that what you will. So can you repeat that question, generational?
Yes, we're concerned about the differential impact on marginalized communities, low-income communities, of the digital divide, so-called. is there a generational thing? Are younger people connecting more? And if you were doing your kind of public consultations, are they going to be more engaged, or are they still marginalized by living in a marginalized community?
I mean, and I think that younger people are more engaged. Absolutely. From a low-income perspective, I still think that they're more engaged. I think they're just becoming, like, they're more exposed to it on a daily basis, and certainly more open to it. I mean, they kind of grow up, you know, swiping at things. Like, I had a friend of mine's daughter see a picture, like an actual photograph, and try to, like, swipe to go to the next photograph, you know? So I think it is becoming sort of an inherent thing, you know, but there's still no question that growing up, particularly in a concentrated low-income community, you have less access to that. I mean, I'm not in the young generation, I'm almost 40, but I grew up in a low-income community, and the only reason I had access to it is because my mom put me through private school. So I still think that that's still an issue that we need to overcome, even though younger people absolutely are more open and sort of inherently technologically proficient.
So there's hope, but we've got to make it a priority. Right, so that's our time. I do want to thank the panel, Lela Goren, James Ramsey, Adrian Benepe, Mariela, Alfonzo, who are doing terrific and inspiring work, each of them. So thank you so much today. And thank you to you, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you plan to see the fireside chat, please make your way down the stairs to Dougal 1. Dougal 1, please. The fireside chat is upcoming.